So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Dima Hamdan. I'm the editor of the Marie Colvin Journalists Network. And the network was set up roughly 3 years ago in honor of Marie Colvin, the Sunday Times reporter who was killed in Homs more than 6 years ago covering the war in Syria. And we as a network, we offer support for Arab female journalists, so mainly freelancers who work with local media in their own countries. And we go about doing that by offering a variety of services to support. So if the topic of this talk today is about helping, we help on different levels. So when it comes to helping journalists with their careers and developing their journalistic skills, we offer them mentorship from some of the best journalists in the field. We've got about 45 mentors, and I can name a few of them. Rula Khalaf of the Financial Times. We've got Samia Nakhoul from Thomson Reuters. We've got Bisan al-Sheikh, who up until recently was working with Al-Hayat. So this is the caliber of mentors we have. We offer support with mental health as well. So we do supervise, or we finance the counseling of some of our members, some of whom work in remote areas where there's no access to trained therapists with experience in dealing with trauma and PTSD. We offer some of these journalists therapy, remote therapy via Skype. We help a little bit with emergencies, but in rare cases because we're not that big. So we focus as much as possible on journalistic and mental health support. So if the topic is about offering help to freelance journalists, we've got 3 organizations here. We've got Sara Jaziri, sorry, because I always read it in English, I don't read it in Arabic, so I'm never quite sure. So Sara Jaziri is of the Frontline Freelance Register. And we've got Ignacio.
Delgado.
Yes.
For the Committee to Protect Journalists.
So and you've been based in Lebanon for up until recently, and recently you're based in Lebanon, and we've got Mary Eshay of the Rory Peck Trust, that was also active working with Arab journalists in places like Syria and Libya. So I think I will give the floor to each one of them to tell you a little bit about what they do and what they don't do, because there are some common grounds between them, but also every single one of these organizations has a very different way of offering help, especially to those of you who work in the Arab world. It would be very important that you know what they can offer you in terms of support. So I think let's start from the far. So Sara, just tell us a little bit about your network of freelance journalists and how they help each other.
Hi, good afternoon, thanks for coming. So I run an organization called the Frontline Freelance Register. We are a members association of around 850 freelancers based worldwide, the international journalists working different stories, and they all assume risk in their work. So whether it's physical or mental or digital security risks, we represent them. What we try and do is be basically a vehicle where freelance journalists can prove that they're journalists. What's been happening a lot of times, they get accused of being citizen journalists or activists. We have a verification process to help them sort of prove that they're journalists. They sign on to a code of conduct which looks at ethics and safety. And we advocate for the better treatment of freelancers by media and governments. For example, we advocate for better pay for freelance journalists, which I'm sure a lot of you can feel empathy for. And we link pay to safety. So if you're not getting paid properly, you can't afford your own insurance, you can't afford, good safety equipment, you can't afford, good transportation, etc., etc. We also, our members, we're kind of like a self-help forum as well. So there's a lot of sort of mentorship amongst our own members, sharing information, whether it's on different assignments, contacts. So we encourage that. And we also coordinate a lot with, we don't do emergency support ourselves, but we retain emergency information for our members. So if anything should go wrong, we are able to coordinate with organisations like the Committee to Protect Journalists and the Roy Peck Trust, which to do emergency assistance. We're trying to basically professionalise, promote the idea of professional freelance journalists. We are going to be introducing things like press cards, which again, a lot of freelance journalists don't have access to because they don't work for a newspaper or a broadcaster, etc. And so again, it's hard for them to prove that they're journalists. And we sort of advocate just for better kind of safety resources for freelance journalists, whether it's equipment, training, or information. So at the moment, we're running safety consultation workshops upstairs with the Roy Peck Trust, which provides sort of tailored safety information for journalists on when they're working on assignment or when if they're local journalists, if they're sort of reporting on their own home ground, how you can keep safe doing that. Other things that we're kind of advocating for is insurance, and I know for local journalists that's pretty much impossible, but it's something that we've been working on, and just talking to insurance companies and seeing ways where local journalists can be covered if anything should go wrong. I think that's kind of us in a nutshell. And so at the moment we're representing international journalists, but we're setting up local chapters for local journalists. Within the next week we should be setting up Mexico and Ukraine, and I'm looking at Yemen as the next place, and Afghanistan. So if there's any Yemeni journalists, there seems to be many at this conference, do come and talk to me. I'd like to know more about how we can work with you guys.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I think we'll come at some point sort of talking a bit more about the question of pay and insurance, because certainly that's one of the biggest challenging facing the members, at least in the network that I work with. Ignacio, if you could tell us a little bit more about the Committee to Protect Journalists.
So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ignacio Delgado. I am the MENA correspondent of the Committee to Protect Journalists. What we do, basically, CPJ is an organization of journalists and for journalists. We defend and promote press freedom worldwide, and we defend the right of the journalist to work freely and without fear of retaliation or reprisal. We do work with freelancers, but we also work with or provide support to staff journalists or media workers, including fixers, for example. And among the things we do, we use the tools of journalism to help journalists, and reporting is one of our probably strongest suits. So we document and we report on violations of press freedom, again worldwide. So whenever journalists are arrested, imprisoned, threatened or harassed, we report on it, and reporting in itself has its value because it has led us sometimes to achieve releases of journalists, as it happened earlier this year, for example, with a Syrian journalist, Abdel Hafez al-Hulani, who was arrested in Lebanon. And just by reporting on it and putting pressure on the Lebanese authorities, he was released on the next day. So reporting, it's a way of giving publicity to cases of journalists who are at risk, and sometimes it works in itself. Around the research that we do, we also build all of our advocacy efforts. So we launch campaigns based on that research. For example, this year we have been covering all the March protests in Gaza, where a lot of journalists were injured while they were covering the return protest. And they were injured by gunfire, Israeli gunfire. So we are trying to hold the Israeli army accountable for all these injured journalists. Some countries are more responsive than others to this advocacy. Some countries care more about how they are perceived internationally, as is the case, for example, of Jordan or Lebanon or Kurdistan or Iraq. And finally, the last program that we have, and that might be interesting for you, is our emergency program. What we do is we share information and practical guidance, so that all the journalists are aware of safety issues before they go on assignment, during assignment, and after assignment. So we help by providing resources or referring journalists to resources to prepare for an assignment, to prepare for coverage, to prepare for an investigation, just by identifying the risk, for example, what kind of digital security they need, what kind of training, if any, they need, how better to protect themselves, what equipment is necessary to carry out what they do. During assignment, we can provide journalists with safety advisories, so we pretty much flag all the risks that they will be facing when on assignment and when covering stories. And there's open access to our physical security and digital security experts for every journalist who has like any inquiries about like the risks that they may be facing, be it physical or digital. So any of you, if you feel the need for it, you can reach out to them and they would be happy to answer your questions. If despite of all this advice, you end up in trouble, the good news, we can help you too. We have a journalist assistance program. We provide support for journalists who are at imminent risk because of their job. That consists of emergency relocation if there's any need for it. So the relocation can be in-country or outside. It can be temporary or permanent. That doesn't mean that we issue visas or facilitate them, but we can support, like with letters or with funding to relocate. Legal and prison support, digital support, and medical trauma. So these are the things we can provide you with if you had any need for it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ignacio. Okay, so Mary, with the Rory Peck Trust, I think you've got a presentation, and you said something very interesting yesterday, that when you first started, it was mainly working with Western journalists, but now you've moved to a point where I think it's 97% of the journalists that you support are local in their own countries, and that's quite a change from how you started.
For the organisation when it started, yes, definitely. So we are an organisation, the Rory Peck Trust, based in London, working globally, and we are also dedicated to supporting freelance journalists. Our focus is very much on safety, and like CPJ, we take a sort of a 360 approach. We support before, during, and after people's assignments, but continuously, basically. The reason that we support freelance journalists is, well, first and foremost, because we consider them absolutely vital for independent reporting, independent journalism, and I think particularly in an era of sort of increased centralization in media ownership, it's so important to have independent voices doing independent, especially investigative reporting. The second reason that we support and consider it important to support freelance journalists is in recognition of the fact that they are the most vulnerable within the media sector. So freelancers often are working alone in very challenging environments, without insurance, as you mentioned earlier, without, maybe the right equipment if they're working in an area of conflict, without media support, without a backing of an institution if they're detained, legal support, etc., etc. So yes, but you're quite right, Dima. When we were set up 23 years ago, I think initially as an organisation we were very much looking at Western journalists goes and covers, a conflict. That has very much changed, and I think that reflects just changes also within the media industry. What was, I think, at the time something quite niche is actually now probably, increasingly the most common way people are working is as freelancers, especially in Europe. And linked to that freelancers are having to take more responsibility for their own safety, even though, of course, and I'm sure Sarah will probably touch on that later, we're also working with news organizations to create this culture of safety and have them take on more responsibility. But in any case, I'm just going to maybe show a very quick kind of 2-minute film which will give you an overview of the kind of support that we're offering to freelance journalists. And yeah, I'll just do that. Hopefully this works.
I've worked with many talented freelancers over the years, so it is a great pleasure to be here supporting the work of the Rory Peck Trust, the only organization in the world providing dedicated support to freelance journalists and their families.
Such a great honor for me just to be here. Rory Peck is a name that stands for bravery and dedication around the world.
I love to be an independent filmmaker because I do the stories I want, and I think passion is what really moves us. But thanks to Rory Peck, I think we have the tools to be more professional and more self-conscious.
The importance of the journalism should never be forgotten, since it's the only way that we can reach the truth.
Our work is important and we should continue doing it.
It's an increasingly dangerous world, in particular for freelance journalists who are the most vulnerable. So, as an organisation, we're constantly having to adapt to the evolving challenges that freelancers are facing on the ground.
They knew that we were press, and they approached to us and started asking us, who do you work for? And of course, it was at gunpoint, and they just took everything we had.
Our first objective is to help freelancers to get back to work. Actually, when I talked to them and I offered them our support, they were kind of surprised. They were like, oh really, is this true? So that kind of thing is really, well, is the best part of the job.
Right after the incident, the Rory Peck Trust contacted me. They wanted to know if I was safe, and they decided to help me out with some financial help.
مؤسسة روي بيك ساعدتني عدة مرات. أول مرة كانت بالعام 2014 بعد إخلاء سبيلي من سجن داعش. كانت من أوائل المنظمات اللي تواصل معي بحيث يقدموا مساعدة إلي إنه.
We are looking at safety not only in terms of physical safety, but also looking at digital safety and psychological safety.
We are trying to reach those local journalists who don't have access to support, who don't have access to any kind of training.
I want to feel more prepared to know what happens when something goes wrong. This course for me is important because it covers not only a refresher in first aid, but also covers topics that are becoming increasingly important, like cybersecurity, assault prevention for women in particular.
There is no hierarchy of need. A local freelance journalist in Mexico researching drug cartels is equally at risk than a freelance journalist on the front lines in Mosul.
When we go out to make films to all the challenging countries, we always know we've got a home to come back to where we're safe. But for most of the journalists that the Rory Peck Trust supports, don't have that kind of privilege or safety. So the Rory Peck Trust needs to be congratulated for the work they do.
That was just really to give you a taste of what we do, but just really sort of concretely, as individual journalists, there are 5 ways that you can access our support. First and foremost, and I think it's probably for what we're most well known, is our assistance grants, which are grants to individual freelance journalists or their families, and the idea really is, kind of to help them at times of need, whether that can cover medical expenses, it can cover subsistence, it can cover equipment if need be. So we're quite broad in terms of the support that we offer through our assistance grants. The second way is our training fund. So people can apply for a training bursary and to take a hostile environment first aid course, or safety training rather. So we cover the cost of participating in such a training course. The third thing is online resources. So again, we also have online resources, digital. So we approach safety, physical, digital, and psychological, and all of those are on our website. I'm happy to say our digital security resources will be launched in Arabic next month, and basically they're free of charge. And yeah, so please do have a look at that. Fourth way is safety initiatives. So we run training programs that are tailored to in-country needs. So oftentimes, we've previously run courses in Yemen, we've run courses in Turkey and in various different places. So these are really tailored to, demand and need that we see on the ground. And the fifth way is safety surgeries. So as Sarah mentioned, we're currently co-hosting upstairs safety surgery, so individual one-to-one consultations with safety experts. So please do take advantage of that. We still have a few slots left for tomorrow, so, you know, book in, because it's great to be able to get this opportunity to get this sort of tailored advice and help plan your assignments. I think that probably covers it. I mean, the only thing I'd say really is what we try and do as an organization is to try and keep freelancers safe, freelance journalists safe. However, if things go wrong, we've also got your back. And I think that's the kind of the dual way we approach things.
Thank you, Mary. At some point later on, we'll be talking about how the three of you as an organization, or actually the four of us, coordinate with each other, because there are things where we overlap, but there are things where we sort of complement each other. To just say at any point, if anybody has any specific questions, we could just have, but please be mindful of one thing, that this session obviously is being recorded by ARIJ, and given that we're talking about emergency and, you know, security and safety threats, just be mindful of that it is being recorded. If you would rather not mention your name, or if you're mentioning anything sensitive, to just be aware that it is being recorded, or you could grab any of us for more detailed questions. Aisha, I think, because you raised your hand first, so, and if you prefer, إذا بتفضلي تحكي بالإنجليزي وبالعربي أمترجم بالإنجليزي مثل ما بدك.
Okay, ما راح.
Oh yes, of course. Sorry, I forgot simultaneous. Yeah.
احنا كصحفيين انتم بتساعدونا. انا حاسه you can translate. اوكي. ان زي ما انت قلتي ان في تداخل.
سوري.
بس من اللي انا سمعته برامجكم ان في تداخل. فانا يهمني كصحفيه اني بدل ما اتواصل مع كل جهه عشان استفيد منها اتواصل معاكم انتوا الاربعه كطماعين شويه. فاتمنى تكون في قاعده بيانات مشتركه ما بينكم لينا احنا. يعني بياناتنا تبقى بينكم مشتركه قاعده، يعني ممكن انتوا ترشحوا ان حد فينا ممكن يستفيد من خدمه البرنامج ده او خدمه البرنامج ده. يعني يبقى في دمج فعلي، بدل ما تبقى في مؤسسه 4 مؤسسات قدامي، لا تبقى مؤسسه كبيره الجهود بتاعتكم بتتوحد فيها، فده هتخدمنا احنا بشكل اكبر. وفي نفس الوقت ممكن كل برنامج هيحتفظ باعضائه ويحتفظ بالصحفيين فيه، يعني يبقى في استقلاليه وفي نفس الوقت في دمج، بحيث احنا نحظى بشيء كبير. اوكي، في منظمات ممتازه لينا بتدعمنا، الى جانب كل تعاملنا مع كل منظمه يبقى في كيان بيجمعكم، بنحس ان في حاجه كبيره بتدعمنا.
Ignacio, can I ask you probably to address this specifically, because it is something that members of our network have asked us from time to time, that there, and especially for local journalists, non-English speaking, that they see there are all of these NGOs or organizations on the ground, and sometimes they're not even sure how to reach out to them directly, or, you know, why to come to Rory Peck but not go to CPJ. So specifically, like, how do you reach out? I mean, how do you tell journalists on the ground how to reach out to you, and you sort of make them understand the distinction between you and other organizations?
Okay. So our organizations, like, for example, CPJ, if you had like any need, our website is in Arabic. You can reach out to me. I also speak Arabic. So you can address like your concerns to us directly. If you have concerns and our experts don't speak Arabic, we will be able to provide translation as well. So that's basically, we have people who speak like pretty much every language, every major language, and it would be easy to reach out. Also, like how we reach out to local journalists is more difficult.
And also, all our organisations are part of, like, we do coordinate and collaborate. So there's FFR is not a member of it at the moment, but there's a network called the Journalists in Distress Network, and so all these organisations do talk to each other as well. So sometimes the Mary Colvin, when I used to work at Rory Peck before, you would share a case, emergency assistance, and we all talk to each other on this kind of secure platform. And so we do try and share cases. There might be an organisation that has better presence or has stronger advocacy or does more trauma work, etc. So we do have that. How many? Mary can talk more about JID now, but I'm sure how many organisations are part of it. Still.
Oh, quite. There are 18 organisations who are part of JID. I think that's the thing. I mean, you know, 3 organisations up here really are our closest partners, but we are all working really, really closely together, both in terms of assistance, in terms of programming work. Oftentimes, I mean, Rory Peck Trust doesn't do advocacy, but many organisations do. We also work more generally as organisations in collaboration with news organisations through the ACOS Alliance, which is bringing together freelancers, news organisations and press freedom organisations. So in a sense, whoever you contact, you're in a sense contacting all of us, because we are constantly in communication with each other and working really closely together. So in a sense, you're quite right, there is some overlap in our activities and in our mandates, but we have it kind of like, it's a finely tuned machine now at this point, that we know who's best placed to take up a particular case or to lead on a particular activity. And you know, we're not competitors, we collaborate all the time and we work together very closely. So please be reassured. I see your point, it's a very good point, but be reassured that we are working very closely together.
مساء الخير، أنا اسمي منتصر حمدان، منسق لشبكة الصحفيين الاستقصائيين ومدرب في مجال سلامة الصحفيين مع الاتحاد الدولي للصحفيين. سؤال بدي أسأل عن، بما أن الجلسة مخصصة لموضوع التوجهات الحديثة على كيف موضوع دعم الصحافة الاستقصائية، إلى أي مدى بتشوفوا أهمية أن لما صحفي من الصحفيين بده يعمل تحقيق بيطلب منا خطة؟ فأنا بقترح أن يكون، أو يعني ممكن نسمع آرائكم حول الموضوع، أن لازم يكون أي خطة لتحقيق استقصائي مرفقة بالخطة الأمنية اللي تضمن أمن وسلامته، يعني موافقة التحقيق، موافقة المؤسسة على إنجاز التحقيق بما فيها أريج يجب أن تكون مقرونة بشكل مباشر بوجود خطة لموضوع الحماية للصحفي، أن نشوف كيف المخاطر المتوقعة، فهذا جزء من الآلية. المسألة الأخرى، الصحفيين اللي بيدفعوا حياتهم ثمن. بالأمس أحكى زميلنا أن في ضحايا، وهذا مقترح أن إذا كان في عندنا مؤسسات موجودة، أن كيف ممكن نفكر كأريجيين وكصحفيين مشاركين حتى في مؤتمر أريج لفكرة إنشاء صندوق الزمالة، بالفكرة أن يكون كل صحفي موجود يشارك مبلغ مالي للناس الضحايا، تحديدا في اليمن مثلا. عندنا زميل قبل 3 شهور الجهلان، يحيى الجهلان، محمد يحيى الجهلان، عنده 3 أطفال، بنت و3 أطفال، ما فيش حدا معيل إلهم. كيف ممكن إحنا كنتضامن كصحفيين مع بعض؟ النقطة الأخيرة اللي هي أنه ولا مرة لازم ننسى المسؤولية اللي بتقع على مستوى المؤسسة الإعلامية، على النقابات، على الدولة تجاه حماية الصحفيين، أو حتى المؤسسات الدولية مثل ARIJ أو الاتحادات. ليش الفكرة أن إذا عندنا هالكم كبير من المؤسسات ممكن نشكل آلية، وهذه مسؤولية الصحفي، مسؤولية المؤسسات أن تعمل على توفير بيئة آمنة للصحفيين، وتنهي مسألة في عندنا موظفين كاملين بعقود كاملة في المؤسسات، وفي عندنا ناس بيشتغلوا بعقود، وفي ناس بيشتغلوا بالفريلانسر، يسأل العقود أو على القطع، فيكون هذول معرضين أخطر، يعني أزود للخطورة في الميدان. فكيف ممكن كل هذا الوضع ننتج يعني توجهات حديثة فعلا لتشجيع الصحفيين على الصحافة الاستقصائية بدون ما يكون في تراجع عن هذا الفن من الصحافة؟ شكرا.
Okay, shukran Muntasir. So I think 3 key points were raised in Muntasir's questions, and actually I would like to, for each one of you to address them. Mary, I'd like to start with you with the first point, the suggestion that there should be a risk assessment, because what ARIJ does is when journalists will come with proposals for investigative reports, there's a focus on the editorial element. But sometimes a lot of them, they work in conflict areas and there has to be risk assessment. And that is in fact something that you had been doing, and to make it more relevant to the region, you did have on your website for a while, there was the risk assessment and actually the safety precautions and preparations for places like you had a program for Syria and Libya as well. So if you could tell us what you do there.
Oh, it's still definitely there. It's definitely on our website. Risk assessment is probably the most important aspect of sort of maintaining your physical digital safety in the field. I'm not familiar with the ARIJ's grant-giving policies, but I will say it's something that we recommend every journalist undertakes before any assignment, is to really analyse the risks that's there. We have risk assessment templates and communication plan templates and proof of life templates and guidance notes on the Rory Peck Trust website in Arabic, and we also, we obviously, as part of the ACOS Alliance, is working very closely also with grant-giving organisations, and it's definitely trying to build into the grant proposal process this idea of risk and risk analysis and risk assessments, rather, being part of how they support and analyse and review grants.
Okay, so actually, you did say the risk assessment forms are there. They're bilingual in Arabic and English. They are
Absolutely.
on your website, and even if maybe ARIJ doesn't have them yet, probably every journalist here can always go on your website and they can check them, and they have the basic.
Everything's there. Everything's absolutely free of charge, and available to access freely. So please, yes, do absolutely go ahead and look at that. Sorry.
Okay, Ignacio, to talk about the fund, it was suggested, for example, a lot of the journalists, they when something goes wrong, they get injured or somebody in their family gets hurt, and actually, a lot of them don't know that we actually have these funds. Maybe some of us have more than others, and the fact that probably if you hear about one case, somebody needs a fund, they come to you and they're like, could you please help me? You can actually share this with all of us. So that's probably something important that a lot of people who work with ARIJ probably don't know about.
Yeah, that's part of our journalist assistance program. So whenever we receive any request for assistance, be it a journalist who has been arrested or who has been injured while covering any story, we will research and gather all the information we have about this case. And then, as my colleagues have been saying, we share information. If it's a freelancer who has been injured, probably, I don't know, Rory Peck or FFR would be better placed than us to provide assistance. It depends on mandates, but no case gets lost. We always find the organization that it's better placed to provide the assistance that is needed. So sometimes it's funding, sometimes it's, we simply cover legal fees if there's a trial against a journalist, or we cover medical expenses if the journalists have been injured.
Okay. Sorry, Mary, you wanted to say something?
Well, no, I was actually going to ask a question.
Okay. Actually, I would like to move, but just to stress this point, because some members, some members, they come to us and they may have been trying to speak to more than one organization at the same time. But actually, the channel of communication we all have is very comprehensive. So if you contacted Reporters Without Borders, you by default have contacted Frontline Freelance Register, CPJ, the Marie Colvin Network, and the Rory Peck Trust. So the channel is there to make it as straightforward as possible for journalists on the ground not to have to worry about contacting too many people at the same time. بس لأنه في نقطة أخيرة, the very last and really important thing that was raised, Sarah, is this point about the responsibility of the organizations towards the freelancers. There's the editorial, moral, and also legal responsibility. And I think this is something that you focus on, because your network is really freelancers working for themselves to lobby these organizations.
Absolutely. So FFR was founded in 2013 when James Foley and Stephen Sotloff were kidnapped and killed. And when freelancers, it was a period of time when a lot of international freelancers and local freelancers in Syria were being kidnapped, and instead of news organizations stepping up and supporting better safety or better communications with the journalists that they were buying work off, especially local journalists, they just decided on a policy of not using the work of freelance journalists at all. So that was obviously not a lose-lose situation for everyone. So FFR was founded to basically say freelance journalists are not, just risk takers. There's a fly, sorry. And that they are responsible journalists as well. Of course, there are people that, this one bad apple can spoil everything. So with FFR, we're trying to be basically a verification platform. That when media organizations work with our members, that they know that they've got safety training or seeking safety, take safety seriously. They sign on to a code of conduct and ethics. But in turn, we expect media organizations to also work with our members and other freelancers with responsibility. It's one of our main issues that we're advocating for is. And it still happens now where a freelancer will pitch a story to an editor, and an editor will say, I'm really interested in this, but because of the risk, we can't commission you. But if you come back, we'll see what you have. So it's basically like a wink, wink. We won't take any of the responsibility, but we would probably want your work. So that's something that we're working a lot with the ACOS Alliance, and bringing up these issues with editors and responsible media. The ACOS Alliance are based on some principles that media organizations sign up to, which is better working with better responsibility with freelancers, and they're based on our principles that we wrote in 2013. Over 90 news organizations have signed on to these principles, international and local outlets. Our next step now is to make sure that they adhere to them, that they respect them. So at the moment, all these media organizations are doing a self-assessment form to see how they're working with freelancers and whether they're being paid on time, their expenses are being paid, they're covering insurance, whether they're covering safety training, etc. But no, I absolutely do hear you. We're still a long way to go. So I have lots of work on top. And the reason why we're setting up local chapters is I think there has been an improvement in terms of international freelancers vis-a-vis media organizations. But what's happening is now that local freelancers are not benefiting from that. So by setting up local chapters, we want to create a sort of a network linking local and international freelancers and having more of a strength, more traction, more voice to push for better treatment of freelancers, whether they're local or international. I don't know if that answers.
Yeah, I do appreciate the efforts you do to help freelancer journalists. I just have a question. I was curious about the kind of support you provide for journalists who are based in places that have no access or very limited access, like in Gaza. We've learned about many journalists being arrested by the authority there. So what kind of journalists you can provide for those journalists?
Yeah, we can provide, first, as I said earlier, reporting. It's a very powerful tool. Believe it or not, when people abroad knows what's going on in a country, it raises quite a few alarms in different countries. So that's one thing that we can do that has no cost. And then in terms of assistance that we can provide, we can provide, for example, trauma assistance. In Gaza, recently, with all the journalists being injured, there's a strong need for it. And many of them are reaching out, just mentioning PTSD symptoms, so we can provide that, and we can provide that remotely. We can also provide funding. It's not impossible, to... In Gaza? Yeah, of course.
Can I ask more about the legal support, especially the CPJ, probably if RORIPEC offers that kind of thing? Because the one thing that not everybody here works in a conflict zone, but the more common type of threat is, the threat of persecution or arrests or being detained, kind of falling on the wrong side of the law, for want of a better term. So how do you, if somebody is detained, they need legal help, how does CPJ offer that help for them? And especially for, Arabic-speaking journalists, when they need access to a good Arabic-speaking lawyer in their country, is there anything you can do there?
So we have also partnerships with local organizations. So sometimes, as Ima was mentioning, we don't have the capacity, like we don't know lawyers in every country, but we know the partners who don't know these lawyers. So it's easy, it's like pretty much like a chain. So journalists will reach out to us, we will reach to local partners so that they can find a lawyer, for example, to defend a journalist in court, and we will cover the cost of it.
So does CPJ have partner representatives, for example, in the Gaza Strip, in some of the MENA countries?
Not now in Gaza, but yeah, we know like human rights organizations who may be of assistance, we know local organizations who can be of help. With authorities?
Yeah, do you talk with the authority there?
No,
No?
like only if we are covering Gaza-related cases, like as reporters, and we are doing research, we reach out for comment, but we are not in touch with them, like not regularly.
Mary, do you want to?
No, this is a really important question. I mean, I think also just touching on what you said earlier, this idea of this new front line. I mean, what we've been seeing as an organization, and that's probably why I mentioned about originally we were set up looking at kind of conflict. What we're seeing now is that there are many ways to silence journalists, and actually increasingly it's investigative journalists who really are the new front, on the new front line, and who are, you know, legal cases are being taken out against, you know, defamation, libel, all of that. We also, I'm one of the members of this Journalists in Distress network that we work with, is MLDI, Media Legal Defense Initiative, and they often support, like we will approach them regarding a case and, you know, that is needing, and they can provide pro bono support or connect them with organizations on the ground to provide that support. Oftentimes, you know, our assistance grants can cover legal fees if necessary. But, you know, again, this is on a case-by-case basis, and we divide them up with our other partners as part of this Journalists in Distress network. But also, sorry if I may, what is really interesting is we're constantly trying to evolve our support, and by virtue of seeing this kind of very different sort of type of threat and risks that people are facing, and particularly local journalists who, you know, don't have the luxury of leaving as such, I'd also, you know, I'm sure we all would love to hear kind of about what you see as the threats and risks that you're facing in the region, because it's important for us to be able to program our activities accordingly, you know.
So just talking about sort of legal issues, one sort of pattern that we're seeing, and this is mainly dealing with international freelancers, but I'm sure sort of regional and local freelancers might have seen this as well. When they sign a contract, if they get commissioned, etc., they've had to indemnify the media organisation in case they get sued or for defamation. So the risk again falls on the freelancer, and the media organisations have no responsibility, even though they're working with a freelancer on a story and fact checks, etc. But it's for the freelancer who has no resources or any money to have to take the risk and indemnify in case they get sued. So that's something that we've seen a pattern of, and I've been raising with ACOS and media organisations to do it, basically.
Okay, so there's another important thing that you do also, aside from just sharing information about legal support, which is making freelancers aware that they can pressure organizations into accepting their terms when it comes to work contracts. That's something, for example, a lot of the female journalists who are members in our network, they're often the biggest challenge. You know, we can offer them all of the support, but at the end of the day, what really matters is they want work. They want work opportunities, and they want to be paid well. And local journalists are often they feel they're in situations where they're forced to accept really low pay because they think that's the only way, and they think that their options are limited. But your organization is doing something about this.
Sure. I mean, one of the things Mary was mentioning is just the way the whole media sort of economy is working. That media organizations are relying on content from freelance journalists more and more often, especially in places that are hard to report from. So, but the power balance is still with media organisations when it comes to negotiating pay or any other sort of expenses, etc. So what we're trying to do amongst our membership is definitely to encourage people to share information. We're not trying to price fix or anything, some of the accusations, but our members do talk to each other about, you know, I've just blah, 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 media organizations, commission me to do this story, but they're asking for what my daily rate is, and just sort of share that information as well, because that gives you something to negotiate. And I think with freelancers, they work very much independently, and sometimes people feel like grateful because they got a commission, but it's just basically kind of trying to empower freelancers with more information so that they can go to them to their clients and say, what's this kind of the average rate, and talk about where you charge more, whether you're using your own equipment or you're working in a place that has higher risk. You should be charging more. We're also working. We're about to launch a template, a kind of a contract template, and some terms. I'll have to translate it into Arabic. What we've done is done a big survey of all our membership about different contracts that they've received and negotiate to get basically an average of what kind of terms and conditions that you can negotiate on, and sort of price ranges and things that you can ask for. And then to blame us if the news organization editor comes and says, well, this is outrageous. Well, no, this is actually a very typical contract that's been produced by FFR, which is representing hundreds and hundreds of freelancers worldwide, and etc. So it's really important, I think, for pay. It's not because everyone wants to buy a Mercedes and have like 5 holidays a year. It's actually just to be able to, journalism is a noble profession. It should be fairly paid. You should be able to pay for your own security and safety. And basically it should be a sustainable profession, a sustainable living. It shouldn't be something where freelancers have to stay at on friends' couches or share with 5 other people, etc. It's when a news organization sends a team, they send a team of like 5 recordists, the camera, security, and they stay in the Hilton, 5 stars, wherever. So they have money. So it's basically just trying to shift that power by just sharing information, I think.
Okay, just to say a little bit more on this topic, because it's really important for a lot of freelance journalists. And again, you don't want to mention names of journalists or names of organizations, but you could still mention a practical example where freelance journalists sharing openly information with each other about how much a person is being paid, for example, and how that actually did help somebody dictate better terms for themselves.
Sure. I mean, a very kind of well-known freelance filmmaker has been working for one of the big international broadcasters, and she's done a few films with them, and they've always kind of paid her when she first started out, they paid her kind of a half-decent rate, but she's always had the same rate for like 5 to 8 years and never changed it, but always, was grateful for the commission, etc. And we were just we have lots of kind of social networking gatherings, etc., where people can just share experiences and talks, sort of offline as well as online. And she was just talking to an Italian cameraman, and she's like a director, producer, does her own research, investigations, everything. And she was being paid about a third of what his daily rates, and he wasn't going to the same kind of places, etc. So it's just like her having that information and realizing, and it was for the same news organization, and then she just renegotiated her rate and just, well, this person's getting this much money, and I'm going into a very dangerous situation, and she was able to push up her rate and get what she actually deserved. But just having that information, I think sometimes it's so hard to get your pitches accepted by news organizations that you almost feel like, again, really grateful that you would accept anything. But actually, we just want to professionalize the trade and professionalize kind of the way you're talking to editors. You're not, you're valuable to them, and you're producing valuable content. So to know your worth and know what's being paid and what the average is, etc.
Ignacio, I want to move on to sort of going back to the question of emergency and help in times of crisis. So when things do go wrong, I mean, a lot of what you guys do is kind of help journalists mitigate the risk in the first place. But when things do in fact go wrong, what's the extent of your involvement, and especially when it's not just about the individual's safety, but it's basically affecting their family, so they don't just need the journalists, it's not just them that they need help for, but their entire family.
So it's basically the same thing, like through the assistance program that we have for journalists, it covers not only like journalists, but also sometimes they want to relocate with their families. We recently had a case, for example, like I cannot name like the name of the journalist himself. But he was from Iraq, and he had been kidnapped twice. He had been tortured, threatened several times, and saved his life because one of his relatives happened to be a Sikh. He wanted to relocate abroad, and we helped him and his family relocate in Turkey, where they are now living safely. So it's not only the journalists, but the families as well. We can provide support for.
And when you say it's providing support, it's not just helping them get out of the dangerous situation, but there's also other forms of aftercare. I mean, you can't be involved for an indefinite period of time, but how long can they expect you to sort of be there for them, and where can you help? It's aside
the
from
priority usually it's getting the journalists out of risk, out of harm's way. That's the main priority. So if they are facing imminent danger in country, get them out of the country, or at least their area where they are facing that danger. After that, once they are safely, we can provide other sorts of support. Most of it is psychological, actually. Most of the journalists we deal with are scarred because of their experiences that they have had. So, yeah, we can provide psychological trauma support in case they need it.
Mary, going back to the assistant grants that you offer, so if you could just tell us a little bit more about, once again, there's the HEFAT, which is the field safety training, and how can journalists sort of, if anybody wants that kind of training, what do they need to do, when they come to you?
It's really straightforward. You go to our website, which is rorypecktrust.org, and there's a request for the training fund, an application form, which I'm pretty sure it's in Arabic. Yeah, I need to double check that, actually, sorry. But so basically it's just fill out that form and submit it it's automatically to the training fund person, and we process at that end. So for the most part, we a Yemeni journalist who's actually attending this conference, we brought to London recently for a hostile environment training course there. But there's also, if, for example, we see a commonality of need in a particular area. So, for example, if we see a country that there's at least 16 journalists we know need safety training, then we will bring the training to them. So it's also working with us to kind of bring to our attention, yes, there is a need here, please, we need a training. And also, in truth, that is probably the better training in the sense that it'll be very much tailored to your needs on the ground. So, for example, if we were doing a training looking at sort of investigative journalists, we did one recently for Cambodian journalists, we incorporated a legal component into that safety training because it's so important, that they know their rights if they're detained, what do they do, all of that. So I think these sort of bespoke trainings in country can be actually hugely helpful.
What can you tell us about the challenges to your work in the MENA region? Because you worked quite extensively in Syria and Libya, and now you're sort of reassessing and kind of looking at the next chapter in your work in the region. So what was the greatest challenges for you in the region?
That's a big question. In terms of the challenge, good. I should flag I have been with the organisation for only 2 years, so in a sense the post-2011 environment in the MENA region, it has definitely been a very strong focus area of our work for the past 7 years, undoubtedly. We receive the highest number of demands from the MENA region, and we have, for the past 7 years, it's the greatest number of cases we support is the region in which we give the most support. In terms of challenges, where do I start? Honestly, there are so many. And you're right, we're constantly evaluating and re-evaluating the support that we provide, and we need to make it relevant, and we need to, be mindful of, you know, obviously there's a large number of Syrian journalists we've supported. Ideally, we would always like our support to enable that journalist to get back to work. In the Syria context, that maybe isn't always the case, because oftentimes we've been helping them to leave the country and they find themselves in Gaziantep. And it's looking at maybe a second phase of support, how we do that, mindful of our mandate, of course, but this is why we work very closely with our partner organisations, because we're like all little jigsaw pieces that you know, fill, you know, the holistic approach of all of our organisations. So whereas, for example, we don't do advocacy or we don't necessarily do media development, but we can, our evidence and the demand we see and following up with our beneficiaries allows us to be able to inform the activities of other organisations who are potentially developing more professional development support in the region. So that's again another reason why we do coordinate so closely with other organisations. But in a nutshell, the main challenge has been conflict has been such a major focus of our work in this region, and I think we would like to start looking more at sort of people doing long-term investigations as well. Perhaps we've been for obvious reasons, we've been dominated supporting sort of people working in conflict, but that I think is also changing.
Okay, thank you. I think the fact that conflict has been a great challenge. I mean, it is a challenge, Sarah, when it comes to the fact that a lot of local freelance journalists, the one thing that they're lacking is insurance. Yep. And most insurance companies or most organizations would not want to work with local freelancers because they don't want to have the legal and financial responsibility if something goes wrong. Yeah. And changing the way national, like insurance companies look at the risk is something that you've been trying to work on. Yeah. And it's probably the
it's the gold. We always say it's the golden egg. Like if we can solve the insurance problem, there probably won't be like a reason for us to exist, which would be a nice thing. Not existentially, but just like for our organisations, because then the insurance company can take a lot of the risk. Even insurance for sort of Western freelancers is hard to get by, and then it's really expensive when you do get it, and then it just covers medical and evacuation. It doesn't cover if you can't use your arm anymore, can't work, or lose an eye, etc. Most insurance companies only pay for 6 weeks of non-pay, which doesn't do much. We are talking to a lot of insurance companies. A lot of times they come up to us and say, we just don't have the numbers. We don't know who these freelancers are. We don't know what their profile is, so we can't do our magic maths and figure out, what the money should be, the premium, etc. And that's one thing that we're working on with FFR, is that we know who our members are. We have a verification process. They sign on to a code of conduct and ethics. They've got safety training. They do risk assessments. So this is one of the reasons that we do exist, and when we set up local chapters, because we can go back to the insurance companies and say we know who they are. We have 200 members in Mexico. We have 800 members internationally, and trying to negotiate a good policy for freelancers. So again, it doesn't cover medical and evacuation if need be, but also loss of income when you're recovering, or if you can't go back to work, etc. But it is really, really challenging trying to get them around the table to do that. But that's so we're asking them, what do you need, and trying to get that information for them so that we can try and negotiate a good policy for our members, a comprehensive policy.
Okay, I think our time is up. We probably have room for one more question, or maybe two more. Safia, yeah.
أهلا، أنا صفية، صحفية سودانية وعضوة في شبكة ماري كولفين. أنا كان عندي سؤال، إنه هل عندكم نوع من الحماية الخاصة للصحفيات، للنساء الصحفيات المستقلات تحديدا، باعتبار هن بيتعرضوا، الصحفيات عموما بيتعرضوا لعنف أكبر، والمستقلات بيتعرضوا لعنف أعظم من الحاجة دي. الحاجة الثانية ده طوالي مربوط بالموضوع بتاع الهوية، هوية الصحفية المستقلة. ففي الغالب مثلا في السياق السوداني عندنا الصحفيات المستقلات بيواجهوا بمشاكل كثيرة جدا عندها علاقة بالهوية. أولا في حالات التغطية المتأخرة ممكن القوانين السودانية تحاكمهم بالخلوة غير الشرعية وممارسة الدعارة، يعني in case of إنه لقوهم مع مصادر. الحاجة الثانية بيحرموا من التغطيات الرسمية أو التغطيات المؤسسات الحكومية، يعني كل شغلهم بيكون متركز على الشغل المؤسسات المستقلة أو المدنية. يعني غالبا في حالات الاعتقال الصحفيات المستقلات حتى الحماية البسيطة اللي بيلقوها الصحفيات عموما هنا ما بيلقوها، لأنه ما بيعترف بهم كصحفيات يعني في حالات الانتهاكات بشكل عام. فشنو الممكن يحصل في الجانب ده؟ شكرا.
طيب بس عشان أستوضح، لما بتقولي هوية قصدك البريس كارد؟ أوكي طيب. Before we get to the question of the press card, Ignacio, could you tell us a little bit about cases, and there had been some recent cases where CPJ and I think other organizations did step in to help female journalists, and more specifically in Sudan, and the support, or kind of you've spoken out publicly about certain cases.
Yeah, in Sudan in particular, actually this year, our Press Freedom Awardee for the Middle East was Amal Habani, who is a Sudanese, well-known Sudanese journalist who has been threatened countless times, arrested as well. So that was a great venue, actually, to highlight all these problems that you are mentioning, especially all the challenges that women journalists and women independent journalists are facing, when covering events on the ground and when doing investigations. So that's one of them. We have been also covering, for example, all the seizures of issues of magazines, newspapers in Sudan. So yeah, we have an eye on it.
Okay, going to the question of press cards, because that's, and because Safia did mention that she is a member with us, this is a question that our members from Sudan, our members from Yemen also complain about, because the unions there don't function properly, and then for a woman to show up and say, I'm a journalist without a press card, she really, can't make her case that she is a journalist.
Absolutely. So we're going to be issuing press cards for our members, and you're free to, if you're a freelancer, please do join us, as well as Mary Colvin. Basically, I completely hear you. The reasons that we've had to start issuing press cards ourselves is because freelancers often can't join their unions, because especially in the Middle East, in some places, you have to be a staff journalist to be part of the union, and then you can't get a press card. So how do you prove that you're a journalist? Most people, sometimes you can say just Google my name, but most people always want to see a card or letter of accreditation, etc. So it's a challenge that we've spoken to the IFJ, we've spoken to some of our national unions to see whether there's a way around it, and there isn't. So we decided to buy a very nice press card machine and make very cool, snazzy press cards. And we do have, we do have a very strong verification process. And our registry is all online. Of course, if there's security issues with a member, they don't have to have their profile online, but it's very easy to show that you're a journalist. You have a press card which doubles up as well. But for us, press cards it's really important for safety, for access, and for identification. For access, for members want to go through a checkpoint or for an airport. How do you prove you're a journalist? Most of the time, it's just easier to show a press card. So that's really important. And again, for safety as well, if you're arrested, how do you prove that you're not a spy or a terrorist? So for all these reasons, we think press cards are really important, not just for identification, but for safety and access. So we've been testing out different prototypes, etc., and we'll be issuing press cards soon. Once I figure out how to press print.
So you will start issuing them soon. You haven't.
Yeah,
already.
we're almost there. Basically, there's going to be a lot of issues in terms of the unions, because of course for it's part of the main work, but for us, for our members, it's really is it's an issue of safety.
Would a journalist have to pay you to get a press card?
For local journalists, no, but for our internationals, we're going to be charging them something like $75 a year, so it's not much. And it's not just for press cards; we're going to be introducing paid membership for our international journalists, but for local journalists, it won't be charged.
I hate to ask twice, but I just have a build-up question. How do you define a freelance journalist? I mean, after the Arab Spring revolutions that many people can define themselves as journalists. And
Well, we should look at the intent.
how would they prove themselves?
Yeah, sure. So for sure, a lot of people picked up a camera or a pen during the Arab uprisings because they wanted to document and show the world what was going on in their neighborhoods or in their homes, etc. This one flies, it keeps attacking me. We look at the intent. So you don't have to go to journalism school or have a degree to be a journalist, even if you're local or international. We just look at the intent of the content that you're gathering. So for FFR, because we have kind of a verification process, we actually look at what have you published in the last year or two. If you're an investigative journalist, sometimes you don't publish anything very regularly, so we just talk to you and your editors or the previous work that you've done. But yeah, so it's I don't think there's like a degree or something that you have to. It's just looking at the content that you produce and the intent of why you're producing it. If you was walking by a news scene and you're just taking a picture and post it on YouTube or on Facebook, then probably not. But if you have kind of a history of content that you've produced and why you're going to take, why you're going following that news story, that's what we look at. So you're not an accidental journalist, but you're intending to publish or bring news out.
Mary, how about the Rory Peck Trust?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, we have criteria as well, as Sarah said. We at least 3 years of professional experience, being an ethical news gathering. Actually, we do have a news component to our work. That it's ethical, that it's, I mean, it's quite clear, but I think and we're broad in terms of, certain situations you might be bloggers, like in Bangladesh or whatever, so we're quite broad in how we interpret what a freelance journalist is. And again, it's also, if you look at sort of technical, innovations and stuff, we also, at the moment, are actually going to review the criteria again, because, for example, lots of people sitting behind their laptops that may never go to the place that they're actually researching, at the moment, our criteria maybe doesn't capture that. So I think that's something that, we're always having to evolve our support and evolve, the criteria has to be interrogate all of our work and our work practices to make sure that we're actually remaining relevant and that we're responding to the needs on the ground. And as an organisation that's based in London without a field presence, it's so important for us to be at events like this to really learn from you what are the challenges you're facing, because we need to be able to respond to your needs.
Any more questions? I think that kind of wraps it up. If anybody would like to say, just a closing statement, or just how can they find you aside from just chasing you down the corridor and grabbing you after this talk is over?
Which is fine.
So we're part of a journalist club in London called the Frontline Club. So if anyone is ever in London, do come by and say hi. Otherwise, just our website, frontlinefreelanceregister.org. And yeah, there's our email addresses, etc. there. But otherwise, do chase me down the corridor. I'm happy with that.
Yeah, for us, you can reach out on our website. It's www.cpj.org. I left here some cards with my number, email, so please feel free. And you can also grab me down the corridor and approach me.
Don't grab me down the corridor, my cards are right there. No, I'm joking, you can, yes.
Also, just to say that we still have, as I mentioned, some slots left for tomorrow for the safety surgeries upstairs, so take advantage. It's free, tailored safety advice, so it'd be silly not to.